Welcome to the Divergent Hope Podcast, Season 2, and today we are talking about living with conflict. Oh boy, a really big, important subject for all of us. We generally try to avoid conflict, and yet living into it, living with it, and facing it, and learning to manage it is one of the most important things, actually, in learning to have better relationships. I am Pastor Laurel Coolbaugh, pastor at Faith Community Church outside of Boston. I'm also a spiritual director, and we're so glad you joined us today. Today, I have the great joy and privilege of welcoming my family here. Indeed, we're talking about conflict today. We've had a little experience with this. So I want to introduce to you my husband, Bill Coolbaugh, and our son, Gethin Coolbaugh. Both Bill and Gethin are co-leaders of the sanctuary at Woodville outside of Boston. And Bill is the head of Boston International Student Ministries, which is affiliated with Emmanuel Gospel Center in Boston. He's involved in multicultural ministry. And Gethin, our son, is both a local and national sports broadcaster, as well as the director of dialogue at the sanctuary at Woodville. So first, Bill and Gethin, why don't you tell us something about what is the sanctuary at Woodville? What do you do there, so people can get that in context?
Yeah, so the sanctuary at Woodville, we bill ourselves as a Christian spiritual oasis and retreat center. Like you said, Laurel, we're in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, serving the greater Boston and greater Worcester regions. It's a ministry that was birthed out of the legacy of the old Woodville Baptist Church, which Laurel was hired to be the pastor of over a decade ago, and she was part of the founding vision and the founding of the sanctuary and the sanctuary ministries. Our ministry's goals are to help Christ seekers go deeper in their faith. With God, go deeper with themselves, and go deeper with others. We offer events like personal and group quiet days where you can come to intentionally intimate spaces to get away from the hustle and the bustle of everyday life and just be with God, whatever that looks like for you. We offer many different spiritual disciplines and exercises for that. We also offer space for other churches and ministries to host their conferences and retreats, day retreats. Even though we're not a traditional church, we do have a Sunday service, Sundays at the sanctuary. It's a worship, prayer, dialogue service in place of sermons. We do dialogues, which we'll talk about a lot today. But dialogues more focusing on, it's like a big group Bible study is what I like to say, where it's you have someone lead and then opening it up for insights and questions. So in 2024, next year, we're about to celebrate our 10-year anniversary of the sanctuary, which will be exciting. So we're going to have a big celebration and a big fundraiser for that. But it's been really cool, as I was part of the founding as well of it. All three of us were. It's been really cool over the past decade to see how God is moving and growing in that area.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
It was born through a vision that God gave Laurel. And it's been really rewarding to see that unfold. We didn't understand exactly at the beginning. We thought we understood a lot of things, but it's been really exciting to see what's happening. And I think we're really learning that the sanctuary, or God's vision, was that it would be a sacred space where people could come and meet the shepherd. I mean, the Lord is our shepherd, really, and often in life we try to find a counselor, find a pastor. We look for all these solutions, but it's really deep fellowship with God that can speak to us, that really empowers us. So it's neat to have a space where people can do that and have done that.
Absolutely, yep. So as you can imagine, everyone out there in podcast land, we not only are a family, but we've also worked together as staff at the sanctuary for many years. I am happily a pastor here at Faith Community now, and we're the ones who are producing this podcast. But we, as a family, as the Coolbaugh Three, as I affectionately like to call us, have had lots of opportunity for and experience with conflict. And what I like to say is conflict, when we actually move into it and through it and learn to manage it, can actually grow us in intimacy with God and with each other. Yes, it's very messy and it takes a lot of time, but through conflict, we can actually learn to know God better, ourselves better, and each other better, which is the fabulous thing about it. So if you keep that in mind, if we all keep that in mind, that's a reason to work through it. So for my first question today, I want to ask my guests here, what were your takeaways about conflict management from your family of origin? So maybe I'll start out. My family of origin, there were 4 kids and 2 parents, and really my parents had a lot of conflict in their marriage, and I think as a result of that, we did not, as kids, and I will speak for myself, it didn't feel like there was room for any more conflict. So I think as kids, we were more seeking to keep the peace. And I honestly don't remember feeling any kind of freedom to be angry or even express anger growing up, which of course caught up with me in my 20s when all of a sudden I felt a whole lot of anger and had to learn to deal with that. Sent me for some good counseling. But I think in my family, I wasn't really taught well how to walk through conflict, deal with anger, because we were trying to keep the peace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How about either of you?
Well, for me, I'll go because then Gethin's a product of the two of us, really.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest.
Yeah, exactly.
So for me, I grew up in a military family, meaning we moved every 2 or 3 years, both in the U.S. and internationally. So it created a pretty close family, but we never saw our parents argue. There was no conflict. And we're all a product of kind of our upbringing that later on in life we have to grapple with. But later on we learned that obviously there is conflict. And my mother's way of dealing with it was ironing. And so then it really explained how come we had the most ironed socks, underwear, handkerchiefs. We were like award-winning ironing. And I remember a lot of the ironing board, but that's how she kind of worked out her anger.
Yeah, interesting. Mm-hmm. Gethin.
Yeah, well, as I often like to say, I like to think I got the best traits of both of you. So, yeah, but no, I think that was important to hear that because obviously you're my parents. You were the guys who modeled for me what real relationship and real marriage looked like too. And it's not going to be perfect. You didn't hide behind closed doors the fact that sometimes couples are going to have disagreements. And you modeled for me that when you have conflict, you need to address it. You modeled also for me what addressing it looks like. It looks like having a discussion, not yelling or name calling. And of course, sometimes emotions run high, but it's about sharing your feelings, listening to the other person's feelings, and trying to better understand, find a fix or a compromise, and then self-evaluate. So obviously, your family is your first and most influential window into what it's like to have relationships and interactions with other people. So it's vital, I think, to set a realistic example of what that should look like. And I feel that you guys did an excellent job of doing that.
Wow, thank you, Gethin. High praise. I know that when we were raising Gethin, Bill and I did feel it was important that Gethin did understand that any relationship has conflict, and also that not to hide it from you. But at the same time, and this might have come more from my upbringing, because with my parents, they really didn't talk to us about what was going on as they were arguing or in conflict. And then kind of magically, there wouldn't be any conflict anymore. And I sometimes felt like, was I dreaming that? So I remember Bill and I talking about the importance of going to you, even in the midst of our arguing or conflict, and saying, we want you to know that we have conflict, but we are working through it, and you're not the cause of it, but we need to take this time to do that. Mm-hmm. Just so it basically verified any anxiety you might have been feeling around our doing that, but also that we were committed to working it through.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of that came from my side of things. So I hope that was helpful too. But
and it wasn't that you guys would fight in front of me, the room in front of me, something. But a lot of couples, people, I think, might even just do it behind closed doors, or not even all in the house if they even do it at all. That's a separate thing. But yeah, so I heard it. I knew it was happening. But I think that's important, and it's important to do exactly what you said too, to make sure the kid who, what they say, your brain doesn't fully develop till 25, something like that. So this little kid, it's important to make sure that they know this is not about you, because I think it's a fight or flight instinct. You hear people are fighting, and maybe even your name is mentioned or something like that, and you're just like, oh my gosh, what did I do? This is my fault, something like that. So it's important to make that distinction, I think.
Yeah, I think it is too.
And I think we also wanted him to see, although it's a process, we kind of had to work through it, and I'm not saying we did it perfectly all the time, but we wanted him to see that some conflict worked out pretty easily, but some took time. Might take weeks or months.
Or years.
Or years.
Or a lifetime.
Let's be real. Yeah.
It's not all a straight line.
Right.
But that life is full of conflict, and I know through each other, just from our vast differences of conflict of growing up, that I've learned a lot about conflict, and that I was pretty ignorant and didn't really know what to do with it early on. So it's a process, and I've really come to the place in my life now that realizing conflict is a healthy thing if it's worked out healthily, and not if it's vicious and tearing people down. But if you work through it, it's probably one of the healthiest things we do.
And for more context, even in our relationship, in our marriage, a lot of my response to my family of origin and the conflict that went on there was when, by the time I met Bill and we got married, I wanted to just nip it in the bud immediately. So bring it out and deal with it and kind of like a lion, jump on it and, get through it. And I think, I'm speaking for you, Bill, but I think initially, because Bill you didn't have experience with conflict, to me, he was like a deer in headlights, like, what the heck, and not really knowing what to do with it. To his credit, he worked with me in it, and he didn't run away. He didn't walk away from it, which was very important for me to be able to try to work it through and work it out. So, yeah, we've had a lot of experience with it, but I do think long-term it's been good, and we've certainly all gotten to know each other better as who we are and our opinions, etc., through it. And
as you alluded to, I think, too, you mentioned it's not just, well, Bill, you said this, it's not about, sure, some conflict you might be able to talk it out in 5 minutes, 15 minutes, some things maybe a day or two, but yeah, there's plenty of lifelong conflict and things that even if you want to attack it and address it and talk about it, you're just not going to come up with the answers in a day, a week, months, a year, some things like that. So I think a big part of it is learning to live in the midst of conflict in your life. To live, this is called living with conflict.
Right.
It really is a with process, because the truth of the matter is, this is life. It's hard. We're always going to have some form of conflict. So you can spend your time trying to make every situation perfect, or ignoring or running away from something else. Or you can realize that, it's like being in the middle of the sea. There are going to be waves coming at you from every direction. So you can either try to address each single wave as it comes, or you can say, I'm going to do my best to stay afloat in the midst of all this situation and try to stay grounded, as it were.
Yeah. And through life, but also through conflict, we're all changing. All of us are changing. And so as we're getting to know ourselves, even in the midst of conflict, we're realizing new things about ourselves, about each other. And that helps us actually to keep moving through and working with each other if we're honest in dealing with it. Yeah. So when confronted with conflict, what are the tools you employ to help you navigate through conflict well? What are the tools you employ?
Well, I know for me, I've learned over the years the first tool I employ is take a deep breath and not just say what's on the top of my mind. I mean, and to kind of let it settle a bit. And sometimes that's quick, sometimes not so quick, but not to be reactionary, and then to make sure I'm really listening. And so once you can calm yourself down, because things can get emotional, and to make sure I'm listening to understand what the other person's saying, and then really to grapple with, well, what are my issues in this? Where am I complicit? Where have I helped create the conflict? But just trying, not that we can do it perfectly, but trying to really kind of embrace that. Okay, let's just look at this. That it's a two-person thing, or maybe multiple person.
Right. I think too. Besides, taking a deep breath, taking a moment. I am learning, and this is I'm very much still in process with this. Learning to try to stop and ask questions more and seek understanding. My tendency totally has been, since I was young, to be very defensive immediately. And so this is still very much a work in process with me, but learning to stop and ask clarifying questions, not assume I understand, even though I think I do, or I hear the words. A lot of times in communicating, Bill and I have, found out that we define things differently. We define terms differently. And what I assume he means by one term is not what he means by that. So, we've really had to work hard on communicating, even defining our terms, so that we can get to the place of really hearing and understanding each other. I think, too, another tool for me is learning to take a break. So when things are, I can feel it in my body when I'm getting so tense, so worked up, and it doesn't seem to be settling down. I just feel like it's just, all it's doing is ratcheting up. That's often a good time for me to say, I need a break. Not to walk away from it, but I need a break. I need to settle down. And can we come back in a defined amount of time and keep talking about this? Often, because a lot of times these things happen at night, I know that I need a good night's sleep. And I will have a bit different perspective in the morning and can be more calmed down. Not always, but a lot of times. So taking a break and saying that you need to do that is a good tool. Any thoughts, Gethin, for you?
Yeah. Personally, I'm a big proponent of dialogue, not debate. As in the introduction you said, I'm the director of dialogue at the Sanctuary at Woodville, and that's a style I've really embraced. You may hear that dialogue. What does it mean? But when you think of a conflict between two or more people, what's the first word that comes to mind? What do you think they're doing? You would think they're arguing, or argue or argument. And another word is debating, too, that's associated with conflict. So think of a presidential debate, if you can even stomach that thought anymore. I mean, it's turned into something else. But what's the goal of a presidential debate? In an ideal world, it's to exchange ideas to advance the country, advance humanity. But that's not what it's about anymore, at least right now. It's become about winning. It's about beating the other person by any means necessary. Usually that's either by being louder than the other person or having the best lines and put downs. But at the end of the day, what does that accomplish for conflict resolution? Nothing. It's just about personal gain. So for me, that's where dialogue enters. Unlike debate, the point of dialogue in modern day practice is not about winning or losing, as debating is about winning and beating the other person. It's about respectful discussion, listening, and gaining a greater understanding. So when I look at confronting conflict, that's where I like to start. I want to come to the table with a mindset of dialoguing and not debating.
Wow, that's a huge distinction, right? And in our society, for sure, we jump right to the debate and winning. Yeah,
exactly. And I like what you said too about pausing and taking a moment. Going back to the presidential debate visual, think how weird this would look if the moderator asked a question or one candidate asked the question to another candidate and they didn't talk for a minute and they just sat there and they contemplated and pondered. That would be really weird watching on television. Yeah. But isn't that the thing you should strive to do? Because it's thinking about your answer. It's taking into account what the other person is saying and thinking instead of just firing out a line that's going to pull well or do better. I mean, you see the candidates are constantly writing down in the middle of a debate their thoughts, and those, I'm pretty sure, are just things they're going to say and retort to that. Right. And when they're taking the time to do that, you're not taking the time to listen.
Yeah, exactly. I think too that, another tool is learning to be present. And Bill, you referred to this earlier, but learning to really listen, learning to be present to the person that you're talking to and really listen to them, which means, makes me think of what you just said, it means you're not thinking for the sake of, what am I going to say next? How am I going to respond? How am I going to get them on that? So really stopping to be present to the person, their body language, the words they're saying, what's coming through them, and not just getting yourself prepared for your next comment so that you can win or so that you can make your point. And this is hard to do. We all know that. It's very hard to do. But to trust the Lord when you're in conflict, even at times, I have said, Lord, help me remember that point, like shoot that prayer up in my head, if that's something you want me to remember. And try to really listen and not just be listening for what you want to say. Exactly. which is tricky. Yeah. It's a good distinguishing thing.
And I think practically speaking, there are a lot of issues today, but one is certainly politically. It can be very divisive. You have friends you can't talk politically. You just can't talk about things too. And as a family, we have very different opinions and ideas politically. But what we have found is we've had discussions where instead of, it's like trying to railroad your thought down somebody else's throat, it's more, like Gethin said, of asking the person, well, why do you think the way you think? And trying to understand why they think the way they think. And it's often very different than what we initially think. Yeah.
It's true. Very true. Yeah. Okay, so what has learning to deal with conflict taught you about yourself and about others?
I think this is really dovetailing off of what we were just talking about, because it's made me ask and evaluate of myself how much I'm actually listening. We just touched on it. Think about it. When you're in the middle of conflict with someone, are you really listening to what they're saying, or are you deciding, like we talked about, how you're going to respond? And before that thought occurred to me, I'd say it's probably 50-50 at best of that divide, and in reality, you're probably favoring how you're going to respond and make your counterpoint instead of actually processing what someone else is saying And yeah, truly listening is hard. It's a discipline, and that takes practice. And the way to do that is to be engaging in that constantly. And you're not going to be perfect because you're human, and there's human emotions involved with that. But that's where grace and love and respect come into play too.
Yeah.
And I think about others, I'd say the number one thing you learn about someone else when you're dealing with conflict with them is if they're truly willing or not to work through conflict. If someone is combative right from the jump, not letting you speak, not listening, then it's pretty clear that they're not willing to come to the table with an earnest intent to work something out. But if they're respectful, graceful, truly listening, asking questions, and can admit to the possibility of being wrong, and that's a big one to me, I think that shows you're in the right frame of mind to actually deal with that conflict.
It's very, very true. Yeah. I think about, learning about myself in and through conflict. Again, over years, I am not talking about even in my 20s, but really coming to understand that I felt invisible a lot of my life. And when I could really put that word to it, then I understood too that when I'm in conflict, I can go right away to that place of feeling invisible and want to fight against that, want to make sure somebody hears me. And to the point I know of beating somebody over the head because I'm tired of feeling invisible and I want to be heard. And so again, I am learning to be able to trust God with those feelings of invisibility, with trusting God to know how to speak my mind, help myself be heard, but also relax and know that God will make sure that I can be seen and heard as I cooperate with God. So that's one of those things. Another one I think of is, this is back when Bill and I were dating, and it was one of the early times that you came to my family's house for dinner. And after dinner, you and I went out on the back porch and we're sitting together. And I remember you saying to me, "Gosh, it seems like your family is really defensive." And I said, "No, they're not." So right away it was like, oh my gosh. And I knew right then I was caught. And I didn't even see my family acting that way, but it took Bill coming into it. And he wasn't saying it in an attacking way at all. But it exposed my defensiveness and exposed, even when he said that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's really true. Why are we all so defensive? So letting people hold a mirror up to you, even in conflict, and being willing, and that wasn't a conflicting situation, but it was a good learning situation for me to even see that my family was like that, my family of origin, and that as a result I was too. And so to learn from that and to try to check myself when I'm in a conflict situation. Yeah.
And I think going back to the point you made early on about, I'm a product of both of your experiences too. I think when you can learn to work with conflict, especially in a family setting, or as we had for years, a staff setting together, it can really help to actually get things done or sort through things. Mm-hmm. Because certainly as a family and then as a staff, we had the benefits of coming into being a staff from being a family. We understood elements of our personalities, our tics, our things that, maybe when we're saying something, it may come across this way, but we're really trying to say this. And that can be really helpful in working through conflict. But something we also learned too is that, you can't just assume that everybody deals with conflict the way that you deal with conflict. Other people everyone's coming from a different background. So I think we all grow up in whatever setting we're in, and we kind of, just like you said, you're saying, no, my family's not defensive. You just think that's how it is.
Right.
That's
right.
the experience the way it is. So everyone is coming with that mindset, and you have to really do the work to get through it. But I think once you can learn to work within conflict, work through conflict, you're setting yourself up in a really good situation, because, and it's not that I would say, I love conflict, but I do enjoy the process of working through that, because that's how things get done. Mm-hmm. That's how solutions happen. That's how things move forward. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're spinning in place, or you're not even touching it. So, of course, you wish you live in a world, a society, a family, whatever, friends with no conflict whatsoever. That would be wonderful. That's just not the way it is on this side of heaven. Mm-hmm. And I think to be able to practice that discipline, to work on that, can really benefit you. But it takes practice. It takes a lot of time, and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to screw up.
Absolutely. So, Bill, go ahead. I wanted to hear from you.
For me, a couple of things. One was the realization that I think most of us know that our opinion isn't necessarily the right opinion. There's always two sides to a story. So really being willing to articulate our side, but listening to somebody else's, or if it's trying to reconcile between people, realize there's two sides to stories, and you really have to listen to both sides. But then also, and you already alluded to that, Laurel, is I think often we can get ourselves in trouble with word definitions, because we both say the same word, but we mean something very different from it. Like, I think a couple examples. In college, I had a roommate from New York City, and the term "the deal fell through." If you say the deal fell through, I would think of it, it fell apart. But to him, it meant it was good. And so, the deal felt like it went together. And I would have never thought of that. So you can be saying the same words, but you're both thinking something completely different. Mm-hmm. Or another thing I know for me is like bend the term perfectly. You could define that as none of us are perfect, because God's perfect, so we can't reach that standard. Or you could use it in a framework of that somebody has an idea of what perfect is, and you haven't met that standard, and they're very different. One was like no error, and one there's room for error in it. Mm-hmm. So I think the words we use, we really have to be careful that we really understand what each other is saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So how has conflict management taught you about personal boundaries? I think this is can be a big benefit of managing conflict. So do you have any thoughts about how it's helped you, Tim?
Yeah, for me, that's kind of a tough one, because I never really thought about boundaries growing up. So it's helped me to identify that I do need some boundaries, because I think it's a tough issue where, scripturally we're taught that we should be loving, forgiving, and that's kind of a not boundary environment. And so it's kind of wrestling with that. Are boundaries really healthy? Are boundaries loving? And so it's really taught me that I need to think about that anyway, and at least establish some kind of boundaries in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think of too, I really came to realize in my 20s that there was a lot of codependence in me around my parents' issues. And so learning to understand codependence, what it is, and then how to appropriately put up boundaries with that emotionally with my family was very important in conflict as well, both in ways that I took that frustration out on others, but also in ways that I would get enmeshed with my own family. Mm-hmm. How about you, Gethin?
I'd say the biggest thing for me that taught me about boundaries, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, is that being human, you're not always going to be in the right place or frame of mind to work through something all the time, and that's okay. But instead of gutting it through or potentially being too harsh or snapping or, Bill, like you said, saying something you don't mean or might regret, it's okay to walk away, so to speak, not permanently, but to say, look, this is important. We need to discuss this, and I want to work through it with you. I'm just not in the right headspace right now to do it. Mm-hmm. So take a break. Maybe it's 15 minutes, half an hour. Maybe it's a day. Maybe it's a week. But you're never going to regret taking extra time to collect your thoughts and get into a better headspace, as opposed to just plowing right through it and saying something maybe you don't mean. There's often, people talk about we're doing a podcast now, the different means of communication, of audio, video. One of the things we're doing now in an audio video setting is we kind of have to respond right now in a way. I mean, we can be thoughtful, as I said, but it goes back to the debate example of if you're just going to have a podcast or something, which is about conversation, and you're just going to have here with periods of 5-minute silence, that doesn't really work. But one of the things I've come to appreciate about the written form of communication too of late is that it really allows you to take the time you need to see what you really mean, see what you really think, as opposed to the words I'm saying right now. Sure, I have thought about them for a little bit in preparation here, but there's still variables. There's still things, and you may not say things exactly the way that you mean. So I think it is important, too, for us to either, it's okay to have conflict and discussions. Certainly nowadays, text messaging, email, the instant chat is more the main source of communication that we engage in. And some people might say, that's not as good as face-to-face, and that is true in some elements. But I think I've found in my life there really is a benefit, a plus to having the written responses and things, because you really get to think about what you're saying, But the same thing applies too, where if you're in a text conversation and back and forth, and, certainly now with I know if you have an iPhone, you can see when someone's responding or writing, so it can almost feel like a race against time or something. But if you can disassociate that and really just focus on your response, or say that, I need a minute, there's the phrase sleeping on it, I'm going to sleep on it. That's really important, I think. Yeah.
This is where, too, for me, the spiritual discipline of journaling can help. It's the same concept, Gethin, that you're talking about. If I really sit down and journal through my feelings first, what I'm angry about, why I'm angry, or what I'm feeling defensive about, or whatever, it can bring a lot of clarity to me as I let my emotions on the page, and then also they kind of stare back at me, and I think, oh wow, even though my hand wrote that and it came out of my head, sometimes it hits me in a new way. And then I see more the underneath issue, of the problem for me. So all these things can be clarifying, whether it's, writing it out in an email, a text, whatever, but taking the time to do it and really think through it before you hit send, right? Mm-hmm. And then also, and I know you already meant this, Gethin, but thinking about if the person really knows it's hard to do that if somebody doesn't know you very well, or right, doesn't know your body language, or they could take it the wrong way. But sometimes actually Bill and I have found it helpful to even text our issues with each other sometimes, because we can sometimes hear each other better.
It can be a great supplement to the process of conflict resolution, but I don't think it's ever, think of the social message boards and Facebook and all, where everyone's a political post where everyone's firing back and forth. You have no idea who you're talking with. You don't know what they mean, what they don't mean. Nothing gets solved there. But if that's part of the process, in addition to talking with someone, in addition to being face-to-face with them and all those things, it can be a great tool. But yes, I agree, more often than not, that alone it's not going to paint the full picture.
Right, yeah. So how has learning to manage conflict, whether in family, church, or the broader community, helped grow your faith in God? So we're really looking at conflict as a tool that helps us grow our faith in God. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for me, first, I never would have said this 40-some years ago, but I've learned that conflict can be really good if it's handled healthily. And I think God uses that to move us often, because we're kind of creatures of habit and we get stuck in places. And so it's part of our sanctification process. So it's uncomfortable, but if we don't experience, we're not growing in God necessarily. I mean, not say we can't, but we can grow deeper by wrestling with things, really. And so I know that's been true to me. And then I also think, in light of that, in conflict, it's kind of good to put ourselves not willingly into conflict, but especially scripturally, as a Christian, we can kind of get tracked in, I think I know what this is, or I think I know what these scriptures are, or I have the answers. And it's really good to talk to people that have a lot of different opinions, not just the way we think, because it really challenges us, and maybe we have to work it out with them or talk about them. But it's a very healthy process, again, because it makes us think deeper.
Yeah, it really is. And I was really struck by something a couple of weeks ago that really what we think about God right now, the image that we have of God in our minds right now, whatever it is already too small. God is so much bigger than what we comprehend God to be at this point, because we're all growing. And as we grow, God is constantly, I like to say, taking the sides off the boxes. And so if we come at conflict or anything in our life with that attitude, that I still have so much to learn about who God is, and my image of God is too small, even right now. Even though I've been a Christian for almost 50 years, it's still too small. And I can learn a lot from other people. What were you going to say, Gav?
And I think it's important to add to this, and something, Bill, as you were talking about that I thought about that I hadn't written down, was it's important to remember the God that we serve, the kind of God that we serve. And we serve a God that actually lets us wrestle with him. A God who says, seek and you will find. A God who, you look at other forms of religion, and it's usually my way or the highway. And of course, there's law with God. Certainly, right. I'm not saying that, but he invites us to wrestle with him a little bit.
Oh, he does.
And that's what we're doing all the time. But, I think for me too, the answer to that question I came up with is, it's really humbled me and reminded me of my faults. I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be perfect. And it's a reminder too that life is hard, and there's just no way around that. It's like there's an Under Armour company slogan they used in an ad campaign a few years ago that I like to say, and it's, the only way is through. You can't go around, you can't avoid it. You want to make progress, you want to get through conflict. It's just that you have to get through conflict. And it's hard work, and you have to be committed to it, and you have to be humble in the process. It served as a reminder for me that, you know what, I don't always understand and have everything figured out and know the right answer. But if you're not coming into conflict resolution with that attitude and that mindset of humility, and that you can be wrong, and that you're really trying to learn and understand, you might be doomed from the start.
Yeah.
There's a visual that goes along with that. Who reminded me that if you're at sea in a storm, they say your tendency could be to try to outrun it. But they said the best way to get through a storm is just go through it. I mean, it's rougher, but you get through it faster.
You think of, we were recently we were out on our boat on Lake Quinsigamon in Worcester. And it was a beautiful day, and we were taking some students, as Bill, who works Boston International Student Ministry as well, often does. And what I've learned driving the boat with my dad too, and it's exactly that principle, because when you're driving on the water and you see waves or ripples that have come from another boat or another place, you're not supposed to drive alongside them, because for the people who are watching this, if you're driving alongside it, you're going to get knocked on the side, and it's going to start going like this. It's going to start side to side, and you run the risk of getting knocked over or falling over. You're actually supposed to turn the boat and cut straight into those waves, go right through the middle of it, and that's the way that you cut through. Either way, it's going to be bumpy.
Yeah.
You if you don't want bumpiness, you can't get in the arena, you can't get in the boat. But cutting through it directly is the easiest and the safest way in that regard, and I think that's a good visual with the conflict too. Again, it's not going to be, rock free. It's not going to be wave free, but that's the best way to attack it.
That's a fabulous analogy. I'm glad you both brought that up and remembered that. I think too, you both have said this as well, I think, in so many words, but the reminder to me is that God is he's way big enough to handle our conflicts, to handle, like you were saying, Gethin, one of my favorite scriptures of all time is Jacob wrestling the angel, and that was the angel of the Lord, most likely Jesus, theophany they call it, which is, God in God's self, coming to in some sort of physical form so that a person could actually wrestle. And Jacob did that all night long. And this is God. God didn't have to let him do that. God could have, smushed him immediately, but God lets him wrestle all night long, even as the scripture talks about it. In the morning, Jacob's still wrestling him, and it's almost as if God's getting a little tired. Not that God really gets tired, but then, Jacob finally says to the angel, I'm not going to stop till you bless me. And so he was just wrestling it through until God would bless him. And again, God invites that. And so often we think, I can't do that to God. That's disrespectful. That's not loving. But God knows who we are. He knows our frame. He knows we need to work through our issues, express our frustration appropriately. And we can do that with God. And we can learn to do that with each other. And that is how we grow. It's how we learn. And we have to learn the way to do it respectfully and lovingly, but still honestly and truthfully.
What I love about that account is that I don't think Jacob didn't start there. He was a shyster and a trickster. It wasn't like years ago he probably would have done that, but he came to realize that you need God and don't leave me, God.
Right.
So it's really a good account that it didn't happen instantly. It was like he came to that realization, and that's why he wrestled so hard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been a very invigorating discussion. Thank you both, and really fun to be on the podcast all together.
It has, and if I may add just one thing as we're wrapping up here, it's been a blessing to work together as a family in ministry and in life. It's something that not everybody is blessed with the opportunity to have. And of course, as we've detailed here today, it's not easy all the time. There's highs and lows of it. And sure, there are a lot of family businesses out there and things like that, but it has been one of the great joys of my lifetime to be in the family business of serving God together. And it's a blessing that has defined my life. And I'm grateful for the opportunity we've had to do that together and the opportunities we still have to do that together through things like this. So I thank you both. It means a lot to me. I love you both.
Yeah. We love you dearly. And who ever thought, it was never part of my vision, I don't think yours either, Bill, that we would one day be a family in ministry together. And it doesn't even have to be the same ministry necessarily, but really seeking to share the gospel and the grace, love, mercy of God together. So it's been a great privilege, great joy. So we hope that you have enjoyed this podcast of living with conflict. We hope this has given you some courage to maybe take next steps in your life for whatever that looks like for you, whether with your family, with a friend, with someone in your community, your neighbor, even in your church, to work through it and to let God grow you and teach you through it, and even show more of God's self to you through it. We do hope you will go to your podcast platform and leave a review, as well as ask us any questions. We love to hear from you. We want to interact with you. And again, this has been the Divergent Hope podcast produced by Faith Community Church, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks for joining us.